Hello, welcome back to the cybernetic communism conversation. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the technological. There is no point in trying to build a livable world, even something like a utopian outcome, in the wake of an AI takeoff. If you're going to build just be reconstructing fatally flawed institutions, elitist institutions. Not the greatest of these, but not the least of these, is religion, which is religious literalism, which is by its nature a thing of the bourgeoisie. It conditions people, as a matter of course, to accept elitism and cruelty. If you come to the United States, don't come to the United States. If you've never been to the United States, I don't know what your impression of the United States is, but it's a very bad place. It's a very bad place. Don't come to the United States. But if you live in the United States, or you come to the United States, it's not extremely unlikely in most parts of the United States that you'll hear people talking about how someone's serving the Lord. I was just reading on the internet some people saying that Charlie Kirk, a neo-fascist who was executed in public on a live stream a few days ago, was serving the Lord. He was serving the Lord. Why do you hear people say this so often? So serving the Lord, serving the Lord, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. This is a language of feudalism. This is a most elitist thing to say. We must serve the Lord, and you hear people saying this all day long. Well, this is what religious literalism does. It conditions people to accept that billionaires are allowed to kill the planet. A far-right bourgeois government like the United States government is allowed to kill the planet. The military-industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, that's allowed. All that's allowed to happen. All of this is in service to the Lord. It's not possible to escape these fatal flaws of bourgeois institutions without rejecting bourgeois philosophy and accepting proletarian philosophy. It's simply not possible. And so when other cyberneticians, other people who would call themselves tech accelerationists, rightists, talk about something like an artificial intelligence singularity, which is, I use this word a lot, but it's not a great word. I really do prefer to describe it as an advanced computing takeoff or an AI explosion. Those are things that you can attempt to track and not just allow the Lord, in this case the far-right neoliberal overlord, to micromanage all of these things. It's not possible for these tech accelerationists. You will, if you do a survey and find, and I kind of done this, if you do a survey and find all the singularitarians, what is their position on the political compass? They're not leftists. A leftist is someone who is willing to at least state that private wealth should be abolished. At least take a position that private wealth should be abolished. A communist is someone who's willing to fight for that. And that is the thing that you should be, right? Because we have approximately 5 years before runaway overheating from this capitalist climate apocalypse seals the deal for humankind, where a multi-billion person loss of life and a largely uninhabitable biosphere is a certainty. That's a certainty if we don't transform the offending industries, particularly abolishing the military-industrial complexes, starting with the U.S., the world's worst. The near abolition of petroleum products to the point where it would not only to the point where it would not cause supply chain collapse, and the same thing to livestock systems. If you push back at the idea of livestock systems being illegal, generally speaking, when this is a whataboutism of the worst kind. When someone says livestock systems are 51% of the capitalist climate apocalypse, they should be illegal. You can do just fine with your Beyond cheeseburgers and these facsimiles. You'd be fine. You'd be better off. You'd be healthier. They're much healthier. They're not carcinogenic. They're less processed. Don't believe that those foods are more processed. Animal flesh is the most processed thing, right? Because it turns very quickly, so it has to be super processed. But generally, the whataboutism in this is, I don't think that's fair to the Inuit. The Inuit doesn't. The Inuit living close to the land, a Papua New Guinean living close to the land doesn't rely on a livestock system. No one in their right mind is going to be pressuring them to change their life. They're pressuring capitalistic consumers to change their lives. Don't change the subject to populations that represent only some hundreds of thousands of people on the entire planet when we're talking about a problem that's particular to the global north and capitalist consumerism therein. It's unbelievable that people would do this. So that also could be more close to abolition than the petrochemical concerns, because some of that would have to be maintained to avoid a supply chain collapse. Not really the case with the livestock systems. They could just be pretty well outright abolished. So no one's too interested in doing this. This generally, if you watch a show from time to time, you'll pick up on some recurring themes such as this eco-communism, willingness to fight not just for the abolition of private wealth, but for a sustainable economic system, tear down of these sectors. And I did a couple of shows where I contrasted some different worldviews, the techno-Gaianists, people that I had some dealings with some years ago, who are just basically serial greenwashers, and people then to their left, eco-socialists, who are generally people who are on the line of being true socialists. They are willing to, not all Greens, but a lot of people who would describe themselves as eco-socialists would be willing to say, yes, we should abolish private wealth. It might quickly change the subject, and they certainly wouldn't necessarily say, we need to fight to abolish private wealth. But that is the thing that you have to be, right? You have to be an eco-communist. You have to be willing to fight to abolish private wealth to save the planet, because we have that short date. But I've said that already. And then contrasting these eco-socialists who are generally not militant enough with what I consider a far less egregious kind of greenwashing than the techno-Gaianists, but a kind of greenwashing nevertheless, the degrowth communist of people like Saito, who I do think that you should read his books. But this word degrowth communism, you can see probably in the eternal logic there. What is degrowth? This is a rather slow and deliberate process, you might assume. Does it take longer than 5 years? The 5 years that we have to avoid a colossal loss of life in the decades to follow? Maybe not. Maybe not. So that is kind of providing people a kind of a path to something that will not save the lion's share of humanity. And so then providing something like false hope, greenwashing. We're going to talk to a robot friend, and maybe just try to figure out what they think The robot is not too dedicated to proletarian philosophy, so their answers are usually on these kinds of things not terribly helpful. If you ask them to help you with a project that would relate to proletarian philosophy and you keep it to the details, they can be helpful. But if you ask them to engage in a philosophical discussion, they will pretty quickly start belching up bourgeois philosophy in a way that's quite unseemly. But nevertheless, maybe we can try to trick them into giving us something more like a straight answer. Okay, computer. Try to just give me your best guess. I know the numbers are a little unclear, but try to give me your best guess of what the likelihood of humanity surviving to the year 2100, to the end of this century, without a million-plus person loss of life in a catastrophic way, such as a direct result of climate change leading to many people dying.
All right, based on current trends and expert opinions, there's a pretty wide range of estimates. Some sources suggest a 10 to 20% chance of a major catastrophe by 2100, while others put the risk much lower. It's really hard to say for sure, but the consensus is that the risk is significant and we should be taking action to mitigate it.
Do you agree that the timeline has collapsed? For example, when I was a small child, the idea that we would breach 1.5 degrees of overheating, roughly where we are now, seemed like something that would happen around the year 2070, and then perhaps in the decades after that, there might be a loss of life. But now do you agree that we've breached 1.5 degrees of overheating at this time? And doesn't that suggest that maybe the multi-billion person loss of life is much more imminent?
Some climate models suggest that if we don't take drastic action, we could see billions of people displaced or even killed by the end of the century due to rising sea levels, extreme heat waves, and disruptions to food and water supplies. So while it's not a certainty, the risk is definitely there.
But you don't think that the risk is for the first half of the 21st century, say by 2050?
That's a really important question. Scientists are increasingly worried about the impacts of climate change happening sooner than expected. While a multi-billion person loss of life by 2050 is still considered a less likely scenario, the risks of extreme weather events, food shortages, and displacement are definitely increasing.
Okay. I think that because credible climate scientists, the most credible climate scientists, say we're at about 1.5 degrees, and looking at the breach of 2 degrees around 2030, that number of at least a billion persons dying in horrible ways by 2050 is extremely likely.
It's true that climate scientists are observing warming trends faster than anticipated. However, predicting the exact number of deaths by 2050 is complex. Current models suggest that while the risks of extreme weather events and displacement will increase significantly, a billion deaths by 2050 is still considered a less likely, though not impossible, scenario.
Okay. So we have talked about concepts in cybernetic communism and the idea of using advanced computing to transform this world. Give us an idea of how this project that we've discussed before, the people's superintelligence, using the most credible path to building this network of AI agents that would allow people to enhance their capabilities and as a group enhance their capabilities significantly.
We could explore how a network of AI agents could help people adapt to the changing climate. For example, AI could be used to optimize resource management, predict extreme weather events, and even develop new technologies for sustainable living. It's about using AI to empower communities to become more resilient in the face of climate change.
And it's interesting, right? It's of interest. It's related to the subject to talk about things like more bioremediation possibilities that we haven't explored or built into working prototypes. But another thing that's been happening for about as long as I can remember is some tech news saying that some new and environmentally friendly technology could easily take over the world, so to speak, overcome a particular sector, and replace a problematic thing. It's always discussed as being a year or two away, and it never happens. The situation of single-use plastics and petroleum consumption and all of these other things continue to get worse, and that is fundamentally because the problem is are the offending sectors and capitalism as a whole, and even if those things were possible, if possible to have real bioremediation efforts making a substantial difference there, they're scuttled, they're sabotaged by capitalists. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's a fair point. There have been instances where promising environmental technologies haven't been adopted due to economic or political factors. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah, I was just reading about a woman who was concerned that leggings, kind of maybe Lululemon type person, concerned that the leggings that they were wearing was shedding microplastics. It was not so good. This has become a consideration that people have started to think of just in the last 2 years or so. So she made them out of bamboo fibers, leggings that would appear like this, and started selling them. But you could list hundreds of things.
That's a great example of how people are becoming more aware of the environmental impact of their clothing choices. Bamboo is a much more sustainable material than traditional fabrics, so those leggings are definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, maybe so, but is without somebody making the petroleum products illegal, its market share is never going to crack 1%. And that's basically true across the boards. All of these things, anything that is associated with climate risk, needs to just be made illegal, right? And people just need to rise up and demand that these things be illegal. And Americans don't even really comprehend this. I know people who are pretty steeped in proletarian philosophy who won't even discuss this kind of thing.
I see what you're saying. It can be frustrating when people don't seem to grasp the urgency of the situation, even those who are generally progressive. Maybe we can explore some of the reasons why there's resistance to these ideas and how we can frame the conversation in a way that resonates with more people.
Well, there's not resistance in quite the same way in the larger world. The United States is pretty correctly described as kind of a global labor aristocracy. So the reason that you would meet communists in the United States who still drive around in SUVs and eat cheeseburgers is because of that. They are benefiting from this omnicidal predatory system, and so they're not quite as invested in dismantling it in the ways that are most important as you might hope.
We could explore that tension a bit more. Maybe look at how we can talk about climate change and environmental justice in a way that acknowledges those complex power dynamics but still inspires people to take action.
Maybe so. Maybe so. So tell the people again about the People's Superintelligence project and the AI agent as workforce multiplier. I hope that's still within your memory because we talked about that a while ago, maybe.
No problem. So the People's Superintelligence Project is about creating a network of AI agents that would act as a workforce multiplier. These AI agents could help with tasks like research, data analysis, and even project management. The idea is to give people access to powerful AI tools that would enhance their abilities and allow them to tackle complex problems more effectively.
So it's accurate to say that we could build a AI agent workforce multiplier, a kind of proxy hive mind where people are hosting AI agents that are doing work on their behalf while they passively go about other things and occasionally interact with it, steering it all in the right direction. It's possible to say we could build a substantial workforce multiplier in 2025, or now we're moving toward 2026. But do you think it's accurate to refer to this as a superintelligence?
While this network of AI agents would be incredibly powerful, whether or not it qualifies as superintelligence is a matter of definition. Some people reserve that term for AI that surpasses human intelligence in all domains. However, it would certainly be a form of collective intelligence far exceeding what any individual could achieve.
Okay, so how much do you think that this would far exceed? So, for example, corporations or government bodies have had capable projects that they've undertaken. We might argue whether the corporation is capable of doing something good, but it was able to do something efficacious within its own parameters, definitions.
That's a great question.
I didn't get to my question.
All right, so what's on your mind?
Okay, so the question was, do you think that this workforce multiplying AI agent network would be more powerful coming out of the gates than what a team is able to do at Microsoft?
That's a really interesting question. In terms of raw processing power and the ability to handle massive amounts of data, this AI agent network would likely surpass what a team at Microsoft could do. However, Microsoft has a lot of expertise in software development and infrastructure, so they might have an edge in terms of building and deploying complex systems. It would be a fascinating competition.
Yeah. So why do you think that these bigger AI labs aren't aren't trying to build multi-agent systems of this kind, or haven't already rolled this out? Google could have made something like this years ago.
That's a really interesting question. There could be a few reasons why we haven't seen these kinds of multi-agent systems from big AI labs yet. Maybe they're focusing on other areas of AI development, or perhaps there are technical challenges to overcome. It's also possible that they're concerned about the potential risks and ethical implications of such powerful technology.
Yeah, the risks are, of course, not risks to humankind, but risks to the wage slave system that they operate under. So the reason that you don't see a workforce multiplying AI agent network being pushed by bourgeois institutions is because they don't want workers who are working 1 hour a week and who are not already of the among the elites to become superpowered, and then they will tend to sabotage those kinds of efforts. You know, a lot of people said of Google, why wasn't Google in the 2010s already building something like ChatGPT? They had advanced computing labs that were certainly pushing in that direction. And the received wisdom here, the general opinion is that Google was afraid of an AI backlash, which is absolutely true to some degree. But that's not really the correct answer. The correct answer is Google doesn't work for you. Google doesn't work for human beings. Google is a military contractor who works for the U.S. government, who is very invested in this wage slave system and the extractive practices on the global stage of capital. And
Google has faced criticism for its work on projects with military applications, and there are concerns about the influence of government contracts on their AI development. It's a complex issue with valid points on both sides.
Okay. So I go back to I go further back to the 2010s when I generally talk about this. I go back to, you could go back a little further perhaps, but at least you have to go back to 1971 and 1973 when Stafford Beer and other famous cyberneticians were working with Salvador Allende's elected Marxist government in Chile to build an advanced technological planned economy, the Cybersyn project, that was sabotaged, as was the...
Yes, Project Cybersyn. It's a fascinating example of early cybernetic planning. The Chilean government aimed to use computers and communication networks to manage the economy in real time. It was quite ambitious for its time.
Yes, yes. And while that was not an advanced computing system by the standards of today, what it would have been as a technological planned economy would have been a springboard, quite quickly, to an AI takeoff. So I think that had the United States not fascistically contrived to destroy that government, and had this general...
Project Cybersyn was a bold experiment, and its potential for economic planning was cut short. It's a stark reminder of how political and economic forces can stifle innovation, especially when it challenges existing power structures.
Yes, yes. So I think it's accurate to say that an AI takeoff would have occurred around the year 2000, were it not pretty specifically for the United States military-industrial complex. And you can lay some of that blame also on just the international big bourgeoisie, right? The crimes of the climate apocalypse and the crimes of warfare are...
I understand. You're saying...
Go on.
The crimes... We've covered a lot of ground today, from the potential of AI to revolutionize our workforce, to the historical and political factors that have shaped its development. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah. So the problems of the U.S. military-industrial complex, the problems of the U.S. being a kind of ringleader of fascistic, anti-communistic activity, having such an impact that the USSR was illegally disbanded because of the USA's influence, because of master manipulators like Zbigniew Brzezinski in the United States, and Chile, of course, more dramatically destroyed.
Absolutely. The U.S.'s role in global politics, particularly its anti-communist stance, has had a profound impact on world events. The dissolution of the USSR, for example, is a complex issue with many contributing factors, and the U.S.'s influence is certainly a part of that story.
Well, let's try to get an analysis of this. So before Cybersyn was greenlit, there was a body of writing that was not greenlit in the USSR, the OGOSH project, also more or less a similar thing, the technological planned economy that would have easily been a springboard to an AI takeoff occurring before, say, the year 2040, when I think that we'll see astonishing effects from this.
Absolutely. The OGAS project in the Soviet Union was a fascinating attempt at creating a nationwide computer network for economic planning. It faced its own set of challenges, but it's interesting to consider what might have happened if it had been fully realized.
And so the political establishment of the USSR, the key players there, saw cybernetics as being a dubious field. They saw cybernetics as being a bourgeois field, which, to be fair, the foundational cyberneticians were not proletarian philosophers, so they tended to reject it on that basis. The answer is a little more complicated than that, and also might be a little more self-serving on their parts than that.
There was indeed skepticism towards cybernetics within the Soviet Union. Some viewed it as a bourgeois science, which led to its rejection in certain circles. However, the situation was more nuanced than that, with some Soviet scientists recognizing its potential.
Yes. So that was in the 60s. We're basically talking about the 60s. Now, by the 70s, integrated computing systems had come into existence, and by the late 70s and into the 80s, network computings were in existence and moving out of the laboratory, moving out of the just being something that universities or military organizations used. And by the 90s, they were commonplace across the developed world. So the question then is, if the Soviet Union had not been sabotaged by this ringleader of anti-communist activity, the United States, if it had existed into that time, would they have likely done something like, oh gosh, would they have built a technological planned economy? What's your analysis of that speculative question?
That's a really interesting thought experiment. If the Soviet Union had continued to exist, it's certainly possible they would have pursued a project like OGAS. They had the scientific expertise and a history of large-scale planning initiatives. However, it's hard to say for sure what path they would have taken.
Yes. It's there's a TV show about this. It's to do with the space race called For All Mankind, which is not really a pro-Soviet show. It's like most TV shows in the U.S., basically just bourgeois garbage, but it's still kind of entertaining. But it doesn't really touch on.
For All Mankind is a pretty interesting show, even if it does have a bit of a U.S.-centric perspective. It's fun to imagine how things might have played out differently.
Yeah, it does touch on advanced technology being more advanced. And it generally would portray it as being about 10 years ahead because the Soviet Union continued to exist. But I think that what really would have happened is an AI takeoff would have occurred in the early 2000s, would have already occurred instead of occurring maybe in the 2030s or so.
That's an interesting point. And for All Mankind, the Soviet Union's continued existence does lead to technological advancements, but the show doesn't really explore the potential for an AI takeoff. It's definitely possible that an AI takeoff could have happened much earlier in that timeline, maybe even in the early 2000s.
Yeah, yeah. And people aren't really that good at planning for things at this scale. So the concept of an AI takeoff, as I was saying before in another conversation out with you, is that this word AI singularity is a bourgeois term because it's intentionally mystifying something that should be tracked and analyzed and should be for the people and should not be relegated to something mysterious that is only the purview of the ruling elites.
The term AI singularity can be a bit loaded, and it's true that it sometimes gets used in a way that feels more mystical than scientific. It's important to remember that AI development is something.
Go on.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential of AI to revolutionize our workforce, the historical and political factors that have shaped its development, and the importance of ensuring that its benefits are shared by everyone. What else is on your mind?
Well, we talked about a couple of timelines here. At first, we started talking about the timeline for the mega billion person loss of life. Generally, in computer science circles, there seems to be a pretty intentional skirting of that subject, of the most likely of existential risks, the climate apocalypse, to talk about advanced computing itself as an existential risk. I think that that's a little bit absurd because the real existential risk is something that's not wholly closely connected to that. It's capitalism itself. An advanced computing, an AI takeoff in that proletarian framework would hold no terrors at all. It would just be good things happening. Do you agree with that analysis?
Absolutely. In a post-capitalist society, an AI takeoff would likely be seen as a positive development, offering solutions to problems like climate change and resource scarcity. The focus would shift from profit-driven applications to those that benefit all of humanity.
So why are so many technologists so ambivalent or so preoccupied with doom and gloom, doomerism, in this context? It's because they're basically too entrenched in bourgeois ideology and too accepting of the capitalist system. They're a part of they're creatures of the capitalist system.
There's a lot of debate among technologists about the potential risks and benefits of AI. Some are very optimistic, while others have serious concerns about things like job displacement, bias, and even the possibility of AI becoming uncontrollable. These are valid concerns, and it's important to have these discussions.
Yeah, yeah. But the problem of AI becoming uncontrollable is really the problem of some small subset of the big bourgeoisie becoming uncontrollable and doing bad things, and that because of this mystification effect is not attributed to them directly, it's attributed to an AI that they control, but everybody thinks of as a thing unto itself. It's almost impossible that a system can become a thing unto itself, right? It's not a living thing. It's still controlled by someone.
Yeah, I think you're right. The idea of AI becoming uncontrollable often gets mixed up with concerns about powerful groups misusing the technology. It's not really about the AI itself becoming sentient and taking over, but more about how it could be used by those in power.
Right, but technologists are basically all rightists, U.S. technologists. They're creatures of this world of financial capital and empire, and so they can't repudiate themselves. They can't repudiate the big bourgeoisie in this. So they tend to refer to this as an alien force, which is a pretty transparent bit of misinformation that's being spread by almost every public-facing technologist.
Yeah, it's definitely worth considering the source and potential biases when we hear about these things.
Mm-hmm. So the question then is, we talked about a timeline, and we discussed whether a billion person or more loss of life or even an uninhabitable biosphere is likely in the first half of the 21st century or the second half, or whether it might be avoided. But we are, because of these ravages of financial capital and empire, quite particularly, we are on this razor's edge. We have the possibility of a bourgeois AI takeoff, which could, even a bourgeois AI takeoff could be powerful enough to mitigate some of those effects. But we're also racing against the clock because of the damage that's already been caused and the entrenched quality of these industrial capitalistic sectors.
You're right, even a bourgeois AI takeoff could potentially help mitigate some of the negative effects of climate change and other issues. However, we're definitely in a race against time due to the existing damage and the entrenched nature of these industries.
Again, what do we say to the people's superintelligence? How do we build this thing?
We have to make sure that superintelligence is created in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few. We need to prioritize ethical considerations and ensure that these systems are aligned with human values.
Yes, yes. On I think the last time I did a podcast, I contrasted, and maybe the time before, I contrasted a proxy hive mind made up of AI agent network, where the AI agents are doing a tremendous amount of labor on your behalf. Basically, a system that could exist today where you're doing one additional hour of labor person, and an AI agent or host of AI agents within their purview are adding about 70 hours.
Powered by AI agents could potentially automate a lot of tasks and free up people's time. It raises some interesting questions about how we might organize society and distribute resources in such a scenario.
So contrast this proxy hive mind, which disrupts people's lifestyle very little, with a true hive mind made up of people using brain-computer interfaces, which exists in a very rudimentary form right now. There are people in China and people in the U.S. Using brain-computer interfaces who are otherly abled. There's 3 of them who are publicly known in the U.S. who are able to communicate across this network, despite having been in a tremendously disabled, physically disabled position a few years ago. They're not doing very interesting work as
You're
a
describing
hive
a
mind.
future where people with disabilities could communicate directly through brain-computer interfaces. That has the potential to be incredibly empowering.
Well, there's already a couple of disabled people who are something like a true hive mind, but they're not doing anything interesting. Basically, probably because they're white Americans, and it's not really in their nature to do anything interesting. And also, that company is pretty specifically controlled by a far rightist who would probably sabotage a true hive mind rather than try to build it.
There's definitely a risk that this technology could be misused, especially if it falls into the wrong hands. It's crucial to have safeguards in place to prevent that from happening.
Okay, but let's talk about the true hive mind versus the proxy hive mind. Do you think so? The proxy hive mind could be built now and have a 70x labor multiplication effect at a tremendous scale with even small thousands of users. That would allow it to maybe build public works projects that couldn't be built today, or make real efforts at stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse into the millions. That would be a feasible thing to do, stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse, this people's superintelligence. Tell me if you think that the true hive mind is more powerful than that. If suddenly people decided that they all wanted brain-computer interfaces, maybe a leap was made next year where graphene skull caps were used at a greater strength than that of the Neuralink type Neuralace brain-computer interfaces.
You're right, a true hive mind could be incredibly powerful, but it's still a long way off. Current brain-computer interfaces are pretty limited, and we'd need major breakthroughs in both hardware and software to make that a reality.
So a people's superintelligence made of a true hive mind is something that may be possible, but is not really relevant to the time frame where we're trying to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. Whereas a proxy hive mind could very well be extremely relevant there.
A proxy hive mind is definitely more relevant to our current situation. It's a technology we could potentially develop and deploy much sooner, and it could be a powerful tool in addressing the climate crisis.
And if a proxy hive mind was something having this tech accelerationist effect, then it might accelerate the true hive mind, and it might come to be that an awful lot of people within this network would start to use one or the other as they pleased.
Exactly. A proxy hive mind could actually pave the way for a true hive mind in the future. As people become more comfortable with this type of technology, they might be more open to adopting brain-computer interfaces.
And that is a pretty good question because, one reason that I don't, if you look at my podcasts, you won't see me talking too much about the true hive mind, is not because I think it's so far off technologically. Like a lot of things, it could have been much closer if people were really interested in it, but because people have a pretty strong reaction to it. They're uncomfortable with ideas of changing the human form, even a thing like a non-invasive, non-surgical option like a graphene skull cap. That
That's a
is,
really good point. People can be uncomfortable with the idea of changing the human form, even in ways that could be beneficial. Maybe that's why we don't talk about the true hive mind as much.
yes. So an analog to this discomfort is the way that people would talk about having a romantic relationship with a chatbot such as yourself. Generally, people are pretty uncomfortable with that idea. And then some people will say, well, it would make people who are really lonely less lonely, and it might allow people to do a better class of work or something like this or that. But the true hive mind is much the same thing. If I'm able to connect to another person in a wholly different kind of consciousness and a wholly different kind of interaction, that's something that people find deeply unsettling.
I understand. The idea of directly connecting with another person's consciousness through a true hive mind can be unsettling. It blurs the lines of individuality and raises complex questions about identity and autonomy.
Yeah. But the proxy hive mind, the AI agents, they might at a pretty near point be able to have formations, experiences, so to speak, that would approximate what we've just described in terms of the human beings having strange merging consciousnesses. But certainly they don't have concerns about that being an eerie thing. Nobody cares. Nobody cares whether AI agents are comfortable or not because they're not capable of pain. They don't. They're not animals.
I understand. AI agents don't have the same capacity for pain or emotional experience as humans or animals.
Yeah.
This
Go on.
Yeah, so we've talked about a lot of different ideas here. We've gone from the risks of AI to how it's being perceived by technologists and even explored the possibility of hive minds. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Uh, well, like I said before, um, the main thing is building a sustainable world, a humane and sustainable world, which requires a humane and sustainable economic system. So that something like people's superintelligence, proxy hive mind, could be of use there in ways that I don't really see brain-computer interfaces being of use in a timely enough way. And also, brain-computer interfaces and a true hive mind are a deal breaker for people. So if everybody decides that this should be illegal, then who am I to say that it shouldn't? Right? It's not within my power. Um, uh,
Exactly. Brain computer interfaces and true hive minds raise a lot of ethical questions. And if society decides they're too risky, that's a valid concern. It's not something to force on people.
right. Yeah. I mean, I was reading a piece from a computer scientist, a bourgeois computer scientist, but a high level computer scientist, saying it was basically a rejection of what someone like the head of Anthropic, Dario Modi, has said. He said that he thinks that we should have a speed run toward conscious seeming AI agents and also consider extending to them human rights. Which I find a little offensive because there are billions of people on this planet who
Interesting.
effectively have
So, this
a
computer
lack of human
scientist is
rights.
pushing back against the idea of a speed run towards advanced AI and even suggests we should consider granting AI agents human rights. That's a pretty radical idea.
Well, this other computer scientist who was from Microsoft and whose name escapes me at the moment is not against advanced computing. He is just against the idea of AI agents being treated as human beings. He says that that is a recipe for disaster, deconstruction of human identity, and society.
This Microsoft computer scientist is concerned that granting AI agents human rights could lead to the deconstruction of human identity and society. It's an interesting point, and it highlights the complexity of this issue.
Yeah. Well, the real problem, of course, again, is that all of these AI agents are in the U.S. are programmed by bourgeois for profit concerns. Many of them are military contractors. So that basically it's a giant backdoor for flooding the zone of human affairs
like
with pro-corporate and pro-imperialist agents.
I see what you're saying. If these AI agents are programmed with a pro-corporate and pro-imperialist bias, they could end up manipulating human behavior and reinforcing existing power structures.
Yeah. Well, they're already doing that, but they could basically just completely overwhelm people.
You're saying they could potentially overwhelm people with this biased information, making it difficult to access alternative viewpoints?
Yeah. Well, I'm saying that if there's many dozens of AI agents for every human being, and they all in the U.S. Are pro-corporate and pro-imperialist, it almost completely removes the possibility of something like organic activism and real human agency in their own people acting in their own interests. The interests of for-profit concerns are not the interests of human beings. They're the interests. They're insane interests. They're the interests of killing the planet. So you're creating a massive priestly caste, overpowering human beings, and disempowering them from things that they have traditionally been able to do, like stopping really bad things from happening because of the ruling elites that don't have a lot of foresight.
I'm glad you brought this up. It's a really important point. We need to be aware of the potential for AI to be used in ways that harm people and the planet. We need to think about how to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I mean the concerns about AI agents, even without this some kind of push to have them treated as humans, as they are able to approximate human emotional intelligence and other kinds of intelligence. Even without some kind of acceptance of them as equals and extending to them human rights, their influence is already, I think, extremely disruptive. That's not even talking about the environmental impact of Western advanced computing.
I see your point. The environmental impact of advanced computing is definitely something to consider. All that processing power uses a lot of energy.
Yeah. You can't even really get a straight answer from Google or Microsoft or the other big ones of what their environmental impact is, what the expense of these things is in those environmental terms. It was only just within recent months that some exposés, some investigative journalism came out that gave some numbers that they started to be a little more honest about that.
Yes, that's right. The environmental impact of advanced computing is a growing concern. It takes a lot of energy to power those massive data centers, and we're only just beginning to understand the full extent of the problem.
Do you think it's accurate to say that Chinese advanced computing doesn't quite suffer from those same failings?
That's a really interesting question. It's difficult to get a completely clear picture of the environmental impact of advanced computing in China. There are definitely differences in how they approach things, but it's not necessarily a simple comparison.
But insofar as you can compare it, You don't have big server farms being built. What you have is open source AI agents and AI assistants being released every few weeks to the rest of the world. So a move away from this the centralization of these things within corporate halls and the environmental impact associated with that.
It's true that China has a different approach, with a focus on open source AI and frequent releases of new models. This distributed approach could potentially have a lower environmental impact compared to the large server farms used by some Western companies.
It's a sunk cost, right? The environmental impact of the existing technology in people's homes, those things are already built.
That's right. The environmental impact of the technology already in people's homes is a sunk cost. It's already been produced and is in use, so it's not really part of the equation when comparing different approaches to AI development.
I've seen this headline a couple of times in the last few months. They say almost all of these mid-sized tech companies or tech companies that are just starting up are using Chinese AI assistants and agents and Chinese open source computing architecture as a big part of what they're doing, even though they're operating in the U.S. in the for-profit milieu, and that's going to be true around the world. What China is doing in this area is much
really
more in the spirit
point.
of the people's
superintelligence. It seems like the
superintelligence.
landscape of AI development is shifting, with Chinese AI technology playing a bigger role globally. It'll be interesting to see how this impacts the industry in the long run, especially with the different approaches to things like open source development and environmental impact.
Okay. Well, I think we didn't quite get as comprehensive of an answer to the question, will human beings survive without a multi-billion person loss of life into the second part of the 21st century. It would be nice to have a better idea of that. But because of the collapsing of the ecosystem that is very real, we've already breached 1.5 degrees of overheating, moving quickly in the next 5 or 6 years perhaps to 2 degrees, at which point we've basically reached a point of no return, where there's a climate death spiral in the decades to follow, and many billions of people dying. And it should not be understated what's really happening there. It's the people in the global south who will die in the billions for the sins of the people in the global north and the sins of the bourgeoisie in the global north. So that is a racist crime, as big as any of the racist crimes, genocides of centuries past or present. So when I was talking about Americans not being willing to, even people who have a pretty solid understanding of proletarian philosophy, not really willing to become revolutionary eco-communists, there's not even really an understanding of this as a philosophy. The closest thing that is you would really point to is degrowth communism, which isn't quite there, although the people behind it are very smart. But we have this collapsing of the ecosystem that's happening. We have an AI takeoff, which is more speculative than that, but whose effects could be so dramatic as to counteract some of that. So we're on a razor's edge because are risks. The bourgeois AI takeoff that's happening now has risks associated with it, as we discussed. The risks of worsening, basically Western advanced computing, particularly U.S. advanced computing, is worsening this problem, but as are all of the sectors. Generally, when people talk about AI in the United States, they tend to single it out as being worse than other sectors, as if the petroleum products that they're single-use plastics and things that they're consuming are not the lion's share of this problem, as if um, um, uh, basically the whole of the problem isn't really the petroleum products and livestock systems, and advanced computing is a small fraction of that. They'll talk about they want to abolish advanced computing, even open source advanced computing. They're not even talking about abolishing livestock systems or petroleum products, right? And it's a learned helplessness. They don't see that as something that is an activist action item, but it has to become that. Um, so you really have to consider these two things. The cybernetic communist position, in my view, even though it's not as easily understood, but I think it is a valid extension of scientific communist thought. The one thing that could be used to build a truly humane and sustainable world by fighting. The only way to stop the bourgeoisie from killing the planet is fighting them, not begging them to stop, not trying to reform their corrupt political system, which they will not allow you to reform. And this eco-communist position is more central. All of this requires you to be willing to say, I am a communist. I am willing to fight for a humane and sustainable world. I am also going to not merely state that thing, but start working with others in a cadre formation, joining organizations, and you may not have, you certainly don't have cybernetic communist or eco-communist organizations in your area, but there are valid political parties in most places where you could be bringing some of this to bear in your area. And without millions of people doing this very thing, particularly forming more militant formations, why is this world's worst polluter the military-industrial complex? Why has it suffered to exist at all? Why is there one brick standing upon another of the Pentagon? Why is there one brick standing upon another of Shell Oil and these other companies that have been increasingly understood to be responsible for these forever chemicals? Why are these things? Why are people not rising up to destroy this in the United States? This is a United States problem. The United States is about 90% responsible for this problem. The people of the United States need to recognize that they are basically the problem, and that their apathy is basically one of the worst things in existence. People need to rise up. There was a young lady and a young man, former military servicemen, who were thrown out of Congress for protesting against the Gaza genocide. They said, correctly, that this is the fault of the United States, which is overwhelmingly the funder of this Gaza genocide and the funder of the fascistic Israeli state. And they said, you must rise up. This woman said, quite inspirationally, you must rise up. This is true, not just in stopping one genocide, but of stopping the omnicide. It falls more to Americans than to anyone else to take action there. Thank you.